My name is Jada, and I am 32 years old. I work as a senior trust officer managing portfolios worth millions, yet in my own home, I was treated with less respect than a doormat. It was 9 in the evening when I finally dragged myself through the front door of the colonial estate my grandfather had built. My head was throbbing from a 12-hour shift, auditing complex assets, and all I wanted was silence. Instead, I walked into a nightclub. Bass-heavy music was vibrating the floorboards, and the smell of stale beer mixed with expensive cologne hit me instantly. I dropped my briefcase and walked into the living room and froze. There was Tyler, my sister Chloe's fiancé, lounging on my antique mahogany desk. He had his muddy limited edition sneakers propped up right on top of my client files. In his hand, he was swirling a glass of wine, but not just any wine. It was the $200 bottle of vintage red I had received as a bonus from the bank owner. He took a sip and grimaced like it was cheap juice. Tyler looked at me with that smug grin that always made my blood boil. He did not even move his feet. He just said, "Hey Jada, you are home late again. You know you really should loosen up because you are killing the vibe in here." I stared at the mud flaking off his shoes onto my quarterly reports. I felt a vein in my forehead pulse. I walked over and snatched the bottle from the table before he could pour another glass. I told him to get his feet off my desk immediately. I told him that this was a workspace, not a frat house lounge. Tyler laughed a dry, condescending laugh. He said, "Relax, Jada. I am in the middle of a flow state here. I am coding the next big thing in crypto, and I need this environment to think. Your little papers are not as important as the future of finance." Before I could throw him out, I heard a crash from the kitchen, followed by a high-pitched giggle. I walked in to find my younger sister Chloe standing in the middle of a disaster zone. She had set up 3 ring lights and a tripod right in front of the stove. There was green smoothie splattered all over the marble countertops and onto the floor. She was live streaming to her 5,000 followers, pouting at the camera while making a fake sad face. She told her phone guys, "Look at this mess, being a lifestyle influencer is so hard sometimes, but we push through." She did not even look at me. She just pointed at the sink, which was piled high with dirty blender parts and dishes. She said, "Oh, good, you are home, Jada. Can you clean this up quickly because I need a clean background for my skincare sponsorship video in 10 minutes." I stood there still clutching my briefcase, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. I asked her if she was serious. I asked her why she could not clean up her own mess, especially since she had been home all day while I was working to pay the mortgage on this house. Chloe rolled her eyes and sighed loudly for her audience. She whispered to the camera, "See what I have to deal with, guys, my sister is always so negative." I was about to unplug her ring light when I heard footsteps thundering down the stairs. I thought finally my parents would come down and restore some order. I thought they would see the mud on my files and the smoothie on the floor and discipline them. I was so naive. My mother Viola descended the stairs wearing a silk robe that I had paid for. She looked at me with pure disdain, not at the mess, but at me. She asked me why I was shouting the moment I walked through the door. She said, "Jada, you always bring this heavy, dark energy into the house. Tyler and Chloe are being creative. They are building their brands. Why can't you just support them instead of being so jealous?" My father Desmond followed her, nodding in agreement. He clapped Tyler on the shoulder and asked him how the coding was going, ignoring the fact that Tyler was disrespecting my property. My father looked at me and said, "Stop nagging, Jada. Tyler is a visionary. He is going to make this family billions with his tech company. You should be taking notes from him instead of complaining about a little dirt. You are just a paper pusher at a bank, Jada. You do not understand how the mind of an entrepreneur works." I felt like I had been slapped. I looked at my mother and pointed at the wine bottle. I told her that Tyler drank the gift from my boss. I told her that Chloe destroyed the kitchen. I told her that I pay the electricity bill they are using to power those ring lights. My mother just waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. She said, "Oh, stop counting pennies, Jada. It is so unbecoming. We are a family of status. We share things. If you were as successful as you claim to be, you would not care about a bottle of wine. You are just bitter because Tyler chose Chloe and not you. You are bitter because Chloe has charisma and you are just cold and robotic. Tyler smirked from the living room, raising his glass in a mock toast. He said, "Yeah, Jada, do not be a hater. Maybe if you smiled more, you would have a boyfriend too." My father laughed. My mother smirked. And in that moment, looking at their faces united against me, I realized something terrifying. They did not see me as a daughter or a provider. They saw me as a servant who had forgotten her place. They truly believed that my hard-earned career was a joke compared to Tyler's imaginary millions and Chloe's internet fame. I tightened my grip on my briefcase. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just looked at my father and asked him quietly if that was really how he felt. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Absolutely. You are lucky we let you live here, Jada. You act like you own the place, but remember, you are just the help we have not fired yet." The air in the room went cold. That was the first crack in the foundation. But I knew the earthquake was coming. I just did not know it would happen that very night. My father Desmond clapped his hands together, silencing the room. He looked at me with a mix of pity and arrogance, the way a king looks at a servant who has spoken out of turn. "Jada, sit down," he commanded, pointing to the small ottoman while he remained seated on the plush velvet armchair I had bought for his 60th birthday. "We have an announcement, and it is going to change the dynamic of this household significantly." My mother Viola immediately rushed over to Chloe, wrapping her arms around her shoulders. Chloe looked up at me and smirked, placing a manicured hand over her completely flat stomach. "We are pregnant," she announced, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet tone. "Tyler and I are bringing the first grandchild into the Jenkins legacy." My mother squealed in delight, clapping her hands. "Oh, Jada, aren't you happy? You are going to be an aunt. Finally, this house will have some joy inside of it." I looked at Chloe. She had been drinking wine 5 minutes ago. I saw the half-empty glass still sitting on the counter behind her. I pointed at it. I asked her if she should be drinking Merlot if she was expecting. Chloe's eyes widened, and she quickly knocked the glass into the sink with her elbow. It shattered loudly. "That was just grape juice, Jada," she snapped. "Stop trying to ruin my moment with your jealousy. You are just mad because Tyler put a ring on my finger and a baby in my belly while you are still single and bitter." Desmond stood up and adjusted his tie. "Because of this blessing, we need to make some structural changes. Tyler needs to focus. He is entering a critical phase of his startup. He is coding a revolutionary algorithm that will disrupt the global banking system. For that, he needs absolute silence. He needs a sanctuary. He needs the master suite." I felt the air leave my lungs. The master suite was my room. It was the only room in the house with soundproof walls which I had installed so I could work on international calls late at night. I told them absolutely not. I told them that I am the one paying the mortgage, and I am the one who needs to sleep to go to a real job. Tyler laughed, a dry, condescending sound that grated on my nerves. He walked over to me and leaned in close, smelling of expensive cologne and entitlement. "Actually, Jada, I have been reading up on trust law. I know you think you are the boss because you sign the checks, but you are just the trustee. That is basically a glorified administrative assistant. Mom and Dad are the beneficiaries. They have the right of enjoyment. And since I am the father of the future heir, I am effectively a beneficiary too." He pulled out his phone and started reading from a Wikipedia page he had clearly just opened. "It says here that the fiduciary duty of the trustee is to serve the best interests of the beneficiaries. Moving to the basement so the breadwinner can code is in the best interest of the family, Jada. So technically, if you refuse, you are in breach of your fiduciary duty." I stared at him. "I have a master's degree in finance. I am a certified trust officer." And here was a man who dropped out of community college explaining my own job to me using terms he did not understand. I looked at my father, expecting him to call out this nonsense. But Desmond just nodded solemnly. He said, "Tyler makes a valid point, Jada. You are just the manager. We are the owners. And as the patriarch, I am deciding that the master suite goes to the parents of my grandchild. You can take the basement guest room. It is quiet down there too. It fits you better. I stood up, my hands shaking not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated rage. I told them that the trust explicitly states the trustee has sole discretion over asset maintenance. I told them they were crossing a line they could not uncross. Tyler just waved his hand in my face. Save the legal mumbo-jumbo for your little bank friends, Jada. Just have your boxes out by tonight. My son needs good feng shui, not your negative energy. That was the moment I realized logic would not save me. Only total destruction would. I did not even get the chance to pull up the deed on my phone or call my lawyer before the chaos erupted. My father Desmond stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor like a gunshot. He looked at Tyler and gave a sharp nod that sent a chill down my spine. Enough discussion, he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. We are done negotiating with a tenant in our own home. Tyler smiled, a cruel, twisted smile that made my stomach turn. He cracked his knuckles and marched past me, bumping my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble into the wall. I scrambled after them, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I screamed at them to stop. I screamed that this was illegal and that I had rights. But when I reached the doorway of the master suite, the words died in my throat. My sanctuary was gone. The closet doors were wide open and completely bare. My drawers were pulled out and emptied onto the floor. In the center of the room sat a massive pile of black heavy-duty garbage bags. They were lumpy and hastily tied with silver duct tape. They had not just decided this 5 minutes ago. They had spent the entire afternoon packing my life away while I was at work earning the money to keep the lights on. The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow. They had touched my things. They had violated my privacy with their greedy hands while smiling in my face. Grab a bag, Tyler, my father commanded, pointing at the pile like it was trash. Let us help her load out. Tyler laughed and hoisted a bag over his shoulder. I heard the sickening crunch of something plastic breaking inside. That sound cut through me. That was probably my professional humidifier, or maybe my expensive hairdryer. He did not care. He marched to the front door and heaved the bag out onto the concrete porch. Thud, thud, thud. One by one, they tossed my belongings out like they were disposing of kitchen waste. I tried to grab a bag from my father's hands, but he shoved me back with shocking force. Don't touch me, he snarled, his face twisted in a sneer I had never seen before. You lost your privileges when you disrespected the father of my grandchild. Get out, Jada. Just get out before I call the police and tell them you are trespassing. Outside, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the front yard, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the window panes. The sky opened up instantly. Rain began to pour down in sheets, a torrential downpour that turned the driveway into a river within seconds. I watched in horror as Tyler grabbed the last bag. It was the one containing my vintage record collection albums I had spent years collecting and caring for. He knew how much I loved them. He looked me dead in the eye, swung the bag back, and launched it high into the air. It landed with a devastating crash near the driveway. I heard the distinct snap of vinyl shattering against the pavement. Chloe stood in the hallway, sipping another glass of wine, watching the spectacle like it was her favorite reality TV show. She giggled when she saw me running out onto the porch. "Oh, look," she said to my mother. "Jada looks like a wet rat." Mom just sighed and checked her watch, not even glancing at the destruction of my property. "Hurry up, Desmond," she called out. "The neighbors are starting to look. Just get her off the property so we can have dinner in peace." I stood there, as the freezing rain soaked through my clothes, watching the people who were supposed to love me throw my life into the mud. The rain was not just water. It felt like ice shards piercing my skin. I scrambled onto the wet pavement, my silk blouse instantly soaked through, clinging to my shivering frame. I fell to my knees in the mud, grasping at my expensive blazers and silk scarves that were now sodden and ruined. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the slippery plastic of the garbage bags. Then I saw it. My silver laptop. It was sitting precariously on top of a pile of shoes near the edge of the driveway. It was my lifeline. It held every client file, every audit, and the secure keys to the trust fund accounts. I lunged for it, desperate to keep it dry, but a leather boot got there first. Tyler stepped out onto the porch, staying perfectly dry under the overhang. With a casual flick of his foot, he kicked the laptop. I watched in slow motion as it slid across the slick concrete and landed face down in a deep, murky puddle. Sparks flew as the screen flickered and died. The hard drive sizzled. My work, my months of data, and my connection to the outside world were gone in an instant. Oops, Tyler said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. My foot slipped. You really should not leave your trash lying around, Jada. I gasped and looked up, ready to scream. But I realized the commotion had drawn attention. Across the street, Mr. Henderson, the neighborhood watch captain, was standing on his porch, peering through the storm. Next door, Mrs. Higgins had pulled back her curtains. They were watching. They were witnessing the breakdown of the perfect Jenkins family image. My mother, Viola, saw them too. Panic flashed across her face. She could not let the affluent neighbors think she was kicking her hard-working daughter out into a storm for no reason. That would look bad. That would look cruel. She had to spin the narrative instantly. She stepped to the very edge of the porch and cupped her hands around her mouth, screaming over the sound of the thunder. "Go to rehab, Jada!" she yelled, her voice shrill and theatrical. "Go get help for your addiction. We love you, but we cannot have drugs in this house anymore. Do not come back until you are clean." Her lies hit me harder than the rain. I have never touched a drug in my life. I rarely even drink. But she was painting me as a junkie to save her own reputation. Mr. Henderson shook his head in pity, looking at me like I was a tragedy. Mrs. Higgins closed her curtains, effectively shutting me out of polite society. My mother had just assassinated my character to protect her ego. I looked at her one last time. She was not looking at me, she was looking at the neighbors, making sure they bought her performance. I realized then that to her I was not a daughter, I was just a prop in her stage play. I grabbed what I could, threw the soggy bags into the back seat of my car, and slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a judge's bench. The verdict was in. They had chosen their side. Now it was time for me to execute the sentence. Standing there in the deluge, I looked at the pile of my life rotting on the asphalt. My limited edition silk blouses were now just expensive rags. My vintage records were shards of black plastic floating in muddy water. A younger version of me would have fallen to her knees and wept. A younger version of me would have begged them to let me back inside, promising to be quieter, to be invisible, just to have a roof over my head. But as the freezing rain ran down my neck, something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap like a bone breaking. It was a quiet click, like a heavy steel lock turning into place. The part of me that craved their validation finally died. I stood up straight, wiping the water from my eyes. I did not scream back at my mother, who was still performing her concerned parent act for the watching neighbors. I did not curse at Tyler, who was smirking behind the safety of the glass door, holding my sister's hand. I simply looked at them. I looked at my father, Desmond, the man whose gambling debts I had silently paid off 3 times to save his reputation. I looked at my mother, Viola, whose public image I had polished and protected for years. I looked at Chloe, my sister, who I had shielded from the harsh realities of the world. I looked at them not with anger, but with the cold detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. To me, they were no longer family. They were just strangers occupying a building I legally owned. I turned my back on the soaking wet garbage bags. I left the clothes. I left the shoes. I left the sentimental trinkets and the childhood photo albums. Let the rain have them. I reached into the one dry bag I had managed to shield and pulled out my waterproof leather briefcase. It contained my passport, my birth certificate, and the encrypted hardware key to the family trust fund. That was all I needed. That was the nuclear launch code. I walked calmly to my car, my heels clicking rhythmically on the wet pavement. I did not run. I opened the door and slid into the cream leather seat. The silence inside the cabin was deafening. I pressed the start button and the engine purred to life, a sound of pure engineering perfection that cost more than Tyler's entire existence. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them still standing on the porch, confused by my silence. They wanted a tantrum. They wanted a scene. They wanted me to bang on the door so they could feel superior. I gave them nothing. I gave them the ghost of the daughter they just killed. I drove down the street past the neighbors who were peeking through their blinds and turned onto the main road. The tears I expected never came. Instead, a icy clarity washed over me. My heart rate slowed down. My mind, which was usually cluttered with worrying about their happiness, suddenly cleared. I reached for the Bluetooth console and dialed a number I had saved for high-level client entertainment. It was the private concierge line for the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. A soft, professional voice answered immediately. "Good evening, Ms. Jenkins. How may we assist you tonight?" I kept my eyes on the road, the windshield wipers slicing through the rain like a metronome. "I need a room for the foreseeable future," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "Actually, make it the presidential suite. I have some extensive legal work to do, and I need the best view in the city." The concierge replied, "Certainly, Ms. Jenkins, we will have your usual champagne on ice." I hung up. I checked my rearview mirror one last time. The house was just a glowing speck in the distance. I was not homeless. I was unleashed. The heavy oak door of the presidential suite clicked shut behind me, locking out the noise, the rain, and the toxicity of the life I had just left behind. I stripped off my soaked clothes, leaving the ruined silk blouse and the muddy trousers in a pile on the cold marble floor of the foyer. They belonged to the old Jada, the Jada who begged for scraps of affection and apologized for taking up space. I walked into the bathroom, which was larger than the bedroom my sister was currently stealing from me, and turned the shower handle all the way to the right. I stood under the scalding hot water for 20 minutes, scrubbing the feeling of my father's grip off my arm. I washed away the mud, the humiliation, and the years of being the dutiful daughter who kept the family secrets. As the water swirled down the drain, dark with dirt, it took my guilt with it. When I finally stepped out, I was no longer Jada the scapegoat. I wrapped myself in the plush white hotel robe that smelled of lavender and expensive detergent. I felt clean. I felt light. I felt dangerous. I poured myself a glass of champagne from the minibar, not because I wanted to celebrate, but because I could pay for it without anyone questioning my right to hold the glass. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed and pulled my backup iPad from my waterproof briefcase. The screen glowed in the dimly lit room, illuminating my face with a soft blue light. I opened the secure banking app. The interface was familiar, comforting, and absolute. I entered my biometric credentials. Face ID confirmed. Voice recognition confirmed. The screen flashed green. "Welcome, trustee Jada Jenkins. Access level unlimited." My family always forgot one crucial detail about the Grandpa Theodore Trust. They thought the money was theirs, and I was just the stubborn gatekeeper. They never read the fine print of the trust agreement I had drafted 5 years ago. Specifically, Clause 14B, the residency stipulation. It stated clearly that the beneficiaries only retain their right to the monthly allowance and housing privileges as long as the primary trustee maintains residence in the estate to oversee asset maintenance. By physically removing me from the property, my father had not just kicked out a daughter, he had triggered a breach of contract. I navigated to the administrative dashboard. I saw the live feed of their credit card transactions. Tyler had just tried to buy a $3,000 gaming setup online. Pending approval. My mother had a recurring charge for her country club membership due at midnight. Pending approval. They were spending money they thought was endless. My finger hovered over the command line. I typed in the code. Violation of residency clause confirmed. Action required. I selected the option from the drop-down menu. Immediate asset freeze. A memory of my mother screaming at me flashed through my mind. I remembered Tyler kicking my laptop into the puddle. I remembered my father calling me a tenant. I did not hesitate. I pressed enter. The screen buffered for a second. A spinning wheel of doom for them, a wheel of justice for me. Then a green check mark appeared. Status updated. All accounts frozen. All cards suspended. Foreclosure warning protocol initiated. I set the iPad down on the nightstand. I took a slow sip of the cold champagne. Outside, the storm was finally passing, but inside the Jenkins household, the real hurricane was just about to make landfall. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I slept like a baby. The storm had passed, and the morning sun streamed through the bay windows of the master suite, illuminating the space that finally belonged to the rightful heir. Or so Tyler thought. He stretched out on the Egyptian cotton sheets that I had paid for, feeling like the king of a castle he did not build. He looked over at my sister Chloe, who was still sleeping soundly, and smiled. They had won. The pest was gone, and now they had the run of the mansion. Tyler grabbed his phone and opened a premium food delivery app. He decided to start this new era with a victory breakfast. He scrolled past the bagel shops and went straight to the most expensive seafood bistro in the city. He added 4 orders of lobster Benedict with extra caviar truffle fries and a bottle of imported champagne. The total came to $450. He clicked place order with the confidence of a man who has never had to earn a paycheck. A notification popped up instantly. Payment declined. Tyler frowned. He assumed it was a glitch. The Wi-Fi in the bedroom was always spotty, he told himself. He switched to data and tapped try again. The spinning wheel turned for an agonizingly long second before the red text returned harsher this time. Transaction failed. Contact your financial institution. His face turned a shade of red that matched the lobster he could not buy. He sat up abruptly, his heart rate spiking. He grabbed his wallet from the nightstand and pulled out the heavy metal black card. It was an authorized user card linked directly to the main trust account. It had never been declined, not once. He dialed the number on the back of the card, his fingers trembling slightly. When the automated voice asked for his PIN, he punched the numbers furiously. Finally, a human representative answered. Tyler did not let her speak. "Do you know who I am?" he barked into the phone, disrupting the morning silence. "I am trying to feed my pregnant fiancé, and your stupid app is embarrassing me. Fix it now." The representative on the other line was calm, cold, and professional. "Sir, I see here that the primary account holder has flagged this account for security review. All authorized user cards have been suspended pending investigation." Tyler froze. The primary account holder. Jada. He hung up immediately before the woman could say another word. He stared at the phone. She had done it. She had actually cut them off. Panic began to rise in his throat like bile. He looked at Chloe, who was stirring awake. He could not tell her. If she knew Jada had the power to starve them, the illusion of his control would shatter. He walked down into the kitchen where my mother Viola was humming happily, making instant coffee, because she did not know how to operate my complex espresso machine. "Is the food coming, darling?" she asked, her face beaming with pride at her successful son-in-law. Tyler forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Actually," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "there is a massive server outage affecting all the major banks globally. It is a huge cyber attack. It is all over Twitter. Total system failure. My crypto wallets are safe, of course, but the traditional banking rails are down. We might have to eat cereal today." My father Desmond looked up from his newspaper confused. "That is strange," he muttered. "I just got an email saying my golf club membership auto-renewal bounced." He looked at Tyler. "You think the Russians hacked the country club too?" Tyler nodded vigorously, sweating despite the air conditioning. "Absolutely, Desmond. It is a global crisis. We just have to sit tight until they fix it." They nodded in agreement, blaming invisible hackers. They had no idea the hacker was sitting in a hotel room 5 miles away, sipping tea and watching their empire crumble, one declined transaction at a time. While my family was likely panic dialing customer service hotlines in a dark house, I was standing 40 floors above the city skyline. The main conference room at Sterling and Vance Private Bank was silent. The air was cool and smelled of leather and ambition. 12 men in bespoke Italian suits were sitting around the mahogany table, looking at me, waiting for a verdict. They were CEOs, lawyers, and veteran investors. But in this room, they were the students, and I was the teacher. I did not fidget. I did not apologize for taking up space. I stood at the head of the table, wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than Tyler's entire fake crypto portfolio. I tapped the glass screen of the presentation board. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and projecting clearly to the back of the room. "The valuation on this merger is fundamentally flawed. You missed the hidden liability in subsection C of the offshore holding company. If we sign this deal today, we lose $40 million within the first quarter." The room erupted in whispers. The CEO of the opposing firm turned pale. He frantically checked his papers, searching for the error I had found in 5 minutes. He looked up at me with fear in his eyes. He realized I was right. This was my world. In this glass tower, I was not the ungrateful daughter or the jealous sister. I was Jada Jenkins, the senior trust officer known as the Iron Gatekeeper. I was the shark in the tank. My mother thought I was a secretary who typed letters. My father thought I just stamped forms and fetched coffee. They mocked my long hours and called me a paper pusher. They had absolutely no idea that the little job they disrespected was the only reason they had a roof over their heads. They did not know that I managed assets larger than the GDP of small countries. They did not know that one signature from me could bankrupt a corporation or save a family legacy. Mr. Sterling, the managing partner of the firm, walked into the room. He was a man who terrified everyone else, but he looked at me with genuine admiration. "Jada," he said, ignoring the sweating CEO. "Excellent catch on the liability. The board is thoroughly impressed. We are approving your bonus increase effective immediately. You are the only person I trust to close this deal." I nodded politely. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." I did not smile too widely. Sharks do not smile, they just bare their teeth. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the polished wood. I glanced down. It was a text message from my mother, Viola. It read in all capital letters. "Pick up the phone, Jada. The internet is broken, and Tyler needs to stream his video game. Stop being petty." I looked at the message. Then I looked up at the view of the city, the empire I helped build, and the powerful men waiting for my next command. The contrast was laughable. My mother was worried about a video game while I was saving millions. I flipped my phone face down, silencing the noise of their mediocrity. I turned back to the room. "Let us proceed, gentlemen," I said. "I do not have time to waste on bad investments." Back at the estate, Tyler was preparing for the most important performance of his career. He had transformed my living room into a makeshift studio, pushing my expensive furniture against the walls to create the perfect backdrop of casual opulence. He positioned himself in front of the bay window, ensuring that the manicured gardens and the swimming pool were clearly visible in the frame. He wanted the world to believe that this lifestyle was the result of his genius, not my hard work. He went live on 3 different platforms simultaneously. His voice boomed through the house, filled with the fake charisma of a man selling a dream he could not afford. "What is up, future billionaires? It is your boy Tyler coming at you live from the headquarters of the Jenkins Protocol." He waved his hand grandly at the room. "You see this house? You see this art? This is what financial freedom looks like. And today, I am going to give you the keys to the kingdom." In the kitchen, my mother Viola was watching the stream on her phone, nodding approvingly. She whispered to Chloe, "Look at him. He is a natural leader. This is going to be big for us." They watched as the viewer count climbed. People were captivated by the illusion of wealth. Tyler was on a roll. He was using all the buzzwords: blockchain, decentralized, paradigm shift. He was building up to the critical moment, where he would convince these strangers to transfer their life savings into his digital wallet. "Okay, guys, listen closely," Tyler said, leaning into the camera lens. his eyes intense. The pre-sale window is closing in exactly 2 minutes. If you want to ride this rocket to the moon, you need to deposit your buy-in right now. Do not hesitate. The link is pinned in the chat. Drop $5,000 right now and secure your legacy. He opened his mouth to deliver the final closing line, but the words never made it to the internet. Suddenly, the high-definition video feed froze. The audio cut out. On Tyler's monitor, the vibrant stream of hearts and comments was replaced by a gray screen and a single spinning white circle. Buffering. Tyler froze. He tapped the screen frantically. Hello. Can you hear me, guys? We are having some technical difficulties. Just hold on. He refreshed the page. No connection. He looked at the modem sitting on the mantel. The row of steady green lights that indicated a high-speed fiber optic connection had vanished. In their place, a single angry red light blinked rhythmically, mocking him. He screamed for Chloe. Did you unplug something? The internet is down. Chloe ran in looking terrified. No, I was just watching you. The Wi-Fi on my phone is gone too. Tyler scrambled behind the television, checking the cables. Everything was plugged in. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He had investors ready to click send. He was seconds away from a 6-figure payday. He grabbed his phone and switched to his cellular data, which was painfully slow in the thick-walled house. He tried to load the internet service provider's app. After an agonizing minute, the account status loaded. It did not say outage. It did not say maintenance. In bold red letters, it said, "Service terminated." Tyler stared at the words. He scrolled down to the activity log. Request for immediate cancellation processed by account holder Jada Jenkins. Reason owner no longer resides at premises. He let out a guttural roar of frustration and threw the modem across the room. It smashed against the wall, leaving a black scuff mark on the pristine paint. My mother rushed in, clutching her pearls. What happened, Tyler? Did we get the funding? Tyler looked at her, his face pale and slick with sweat. No, he whispered. We did not get a dime. She cut the cord. Jada cut the business line. We are offline. The stream is dead, and so is the deal. For the first time, the silence in the big house did not feel peaceful. It felt like a tomb. The Oakwood Country Club was the one place where my father Desmond felt truly powerful. It was a sanctuary of old money-polished wood and hushed conversations about capital gains. He sat at the best table on the patio overlooking the 18th hole, holding court with 3 of his oldest friends. They were men of influence, retired judges and real estate moguls who judged a man's worth by the weight of his watch. Desmond was in his element. He swirled his scotch and laughed loudly at a joke he had told 1,000 times. He was bragging about Tyler, of course. He told them that his son-in-law was on the verge of a breakthrough that would put the Jenkins family on the cover of Forbes. He spoke of diversified portfolios and legacy assets, conveniently forgetting that the only reason he could afford the membership dues here was because I managed the trust fund dividends with obsessive precision. The waiter approached with the bill on a small silver tray. It was a substantial tab. They had ordered the dry aged steaks and the 30-year-old single malt. Desmond did not even look at the total. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the platinum membership card with a theatrical flourish. He slapped it onto the tray and waved the waiter away. Put it on the house account, he said, beaming at his friends. It is my treat, gentlemen. His friends nodded in appreciation, raising their glasses. You are too generous, Desmond, one of them said. It is good to see business is booming. 10 minutes passed. The conversation drifted to summer homes in the Hamptons. Desmond was just about to light a cigar when the waiter returned. He did not look happy. He leaned down close to my father's ear, trying to be discreet. I am terribly sorry, Mr. Jenkins, but the system is not accepting your card. Desmond frowned, his ego instantly bruised. What do you mean, not accepting? That is a platinum card. Run it again. The waiter shifted uncomfortably. We did, sir, 3 times. It says the account has been suspended by the administrator. The table went silent. The other men exchanged glances. In their world, a declined card was not just an inconvenience, it was a social death sentence. It signaled cash flow problems, bankruptcy, or scandal. Desmond laughed nervously. That is ridiculous. My daughter handles the administrative side. She probably just forgot to update the expiration date. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly. Let me just call my wife to bring some cash. It is just a clerical error, boys. One of the men, a retired judge, cleared his throat. Do not worry about it, Desmond. I can get this one if things are a little tight at home. We know the markets have been volatile lately. The pity in his voice was worse than anger. Desmond turned a deep shade of purple. No, he snapped. I have the money. My wife is 10 minutes away. He had to sit there for 20 agonizing minutes while his friends checked their watches and made polite excuses to leave. When my mother Viola finally rushed in clutching a wad of cash from her emergency safe, Desmond looked small. He looked defeated. He watched his friends drive away in their luxury cars, knowing that by tomorrow morning the rumor would spread through the entire club. The Jenkins fortune was frozen, and the man who claimed to be the king of the castle could not even buy a lunch without his banished daughter's permission. For the first time, the shame began to gnaw at him, eating away the facade he had built his entire life around. 7 days. That is exactly how long it took for the Jenkins dynasty to start rotting, literally. Without my invisible labor, the grand colonial estate that my mother Viola prized above her own soul began to disintegrate. It started with the swimming pool. For years I had managed the contract with the pool maintenance company, ensuring they came twice a week to balance the chemicals and skim the leaves. But when I froze the accounts, the autopay stopped. The pool guys did not show up. Now the crystal-clear turquoise water that was the envy of the neighborhood had turned into a thick soup of emerald green algae. A layer of dead leaves floated on the surface, and mosquitoes had begun to breed in the stagnant water. My father Desmond stood by the patio doors staring at the swamp in his backyard, holding a glass of scotch that he was rationing, because he could not buy more. He looked confused, as if he expected the water to clean itself out of respect for his last name. He turned to Tyler and asked why the filtration system was not working. Tyler, who had never lifted a finger in his life, just shrugged and said it was probably part of the cyber attack that took down the internet. Inside the house, the situation was even worse. The kitchen, which was usually spotless, smelled like a dumpster behind a seafood restaurant. The smell was thick and cloying, hanging in the air like a fog. The trash compactor was jammed because they had tried to shove pizza boxes into it. The main garbage bins outside were overflowing because nobody knew that trash collection day was Tuesday morning. I used to drag the heavy bins to the curb every Monday night in my suit heels. They never saw me do it, so they assumed it happened by magic. Chloe sat at the kitchen island, surrounded by takeout containers that were growing their own ecosystems of mold. She was completely oblivious to the filth. She had set up her ring light again, pushing aside a stack of dirty plates to make space for her makeup kit. She was recording a tutorial on clean beauty. The irony was suffocating. She smiled at her phone, her skin glowing with expensive foundation, while a fruit fly buzzed around her head. "Hey guys," she chirped using her fake influencer voice. "Today is all about purity and keeping your environment toxic-free, just like my skincare routine." My mother walked in, holding a handkerchief over her nose. She looked at the mountain of trash, and then at Chloe. "Chloe, do something about this smell." Viola snapped, her voice muffled by the fabric. "It is embarrassing." The delivery boy looked at me like I live in a landfill. Chloe did not look up from her phone. "I cannot touch garbage, Mom. I just got a manicure. Besides, Jada usually handles the domestic stuff. Where is she anyway? Is she done with her little tantrum yet?" They still believed I would come back. They thought this was just a game. They sat in their own filth, waiting for the servant to return and scrub the floors. They did not realize that the servant had taken the keys to the castle and the checkbook with her. I was not coming back to clean up their mess. I was watching from a distance, waiting for the health department to do it for me. The rot had set in, and no amount of foundation could cover up the decay of a family that had forgotten how to survive without a host. The air in the living room was thick with heat because the central cooling system had shut down yesterday afternoon. My father, Desmond, sat in his armchair sweating through his linen shirt, fanning himself with a stack of overdue bills. My mother, Viola, was pacing back and forth, muttering about how she could not host the charity gala next week if the house looked like a disaster zone. Tyler sat on the sofa, cool as a cucumber despite the temperature. He was tapping away on his phone, scrolling through charts that meant absolutely nothing. He looked up at them with a practiced expression of concern. "You know why she is doing this, right?" he asked softly. "It is not about the room. It is not about respect. It is about envy. Pure and simple." Desmond looked up, wiping his forehead. "What do you mean, envy?" Tyler stood up and walked over to the fireplace, leaning against it, like he was giving a TED talk. "Think about it, Desmond. Jada has been working at that bank for 10 years, and what does she have to show for it? A salary, a 401k, boring stuff. She sees me and Chloe building an empire. She sees us living the lifestyle she dreams of, but is too afraid to chase. She froze the accounts because she wants to sabotage your success. She wants to keep you dependent on her so she can feel powerful." My mother stopped pacing. "That actually makes sense," she said, her eyes widening. "She always was jealous of Chloe. Even when they were little, Jada always had to be the responsible one while Chloe was the star. She hates that we love you, Tyler. She hates that you are going to take this family to the next level." Tyler nodded, solemn and grave. "Exactly, Viola. And the saddest part is she is hurting you to get to me. I have a deal on the table right now. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in decentralized finance. If I had access to the liquid capital in the trust fund, just for 30 days, I could flip that 5 million into 50 million. We are talking private jets, Desmond. We are talking about buying the country club, not just being members." Desmond's eyes lit up. 50 million, he whispered. "Yes," Tyler lied smoothly, not blinking an eye. "But I cannot do it if Jada is holding the purse strings. She is too risk-averse. She thinks small. You need to take control back. You are the patriarch. You need to make her sign over the trustee rights to me. I will manage the wealth. I will multiply it. And I will make sure you never have to worry about a declined card ever again." Viola grabbed Desmond's arm. "Do it, Desmond. Make her sign. We cannot let her ruin our future because she is bitter. We need that money." Desmond stood up, his chest puffing out with false bravado. "You are right. She is just a glorified accountant. I am the head of this family. We will invite her over. We will play nice. And once she is here, we will make her understand that the torch is being passed to someone with vision." Tyler smiled, hiding the predator behind his teeth. "Great idea," he said. "Let us get our money back." They had no idea they were plotting to hand the keys of the vault to the robber, but greed has a way of blinding even the most careful men. The law firm of Patterson and Associates was a fortress of silence and old money power located in the heart of the financial district. It was the complete opposite of the chaotic, decaying mansion I used to call home. Here the air smelled of lemon polish and leather-bound books. I sat in a high-backed wing chair opposite Mr. Patterson. He was my grandfather's oldest friend, and the only man my father actually feared. He looked at me over the rim of his spectacles, his expression grave but kind. "You did the right thing, Jada," he said, his voice raspy with age. "Your grandfather wrote that clause specifically for a situation like this. He knew your father had a weakness for flashy things and flashy people. By kicking you out, Desmond effectively fired himself as a beneficiary. Legally, you are untouchable." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief. But Mr. Patterson was not finished. He leaned forward and clasped his hands on the mahogany desk. However, the freezing of the accounts triggered more than just a domestic dispute. It triggered a federal flag. "That is why I asked you to come here today. I would like you to meet Special Agent Miller." I turned around. Standing in the corner of the room, partially obscured by the shadows, was a man I had not noticed when I walked in. He stepped forward into the light. He was sharp, angular, and wore a gray suit that looked government-issued. He did not smile. He placed a thick manila folder on the desk in front of me. Ms. Jenkins, Agent Miller said, his voice clipped and professional. "We have been tracking the activity on your family trust for 6 months. We suspected money laundering, but we could not prove the origin until your recent freeze order stopped a transaction to a shell company in the Cayman Islands." I frowned. "My father does not know how to launder money. He can barely use online banking." "It is not your father," Agent Miller replied. "It is the man living in your house. Open the folder." I flipped open the cover. My breath caught in my throat. Paper clipped to the top was a mugshot. It was him. The hair was different, darker and shorter, and he had a rough beard in the photo, but the eyes were unmistakable. It was Tyler. But the name underneath did not say Tyler. It read Chad Michael Evans. Agent Miller pointed to the rap sheet. Chad Evans is a career con artist. He specializes in romance scams targeting the daughters of affluent families. He infiltrates the home, isolates the victims from their support systems, and then drains their assets into offshore crypto accounts. We have warrants for his arrest in Florida, Texas, and Nevada. He has stolen over $12 million from 3 different families in the last 4 years. I felt sick. The pregnancy, the engagement, the coding genius persona. It was all a script. He had played Chloe like a fiddle, and my parents had applauded the performance. He was trying to liquidate the main principle of the trust, Agent Miller explained. That transaction you blocked yesterday morning. That was him trying to wire $5 million to a wallet that vanishes without a trace. You did not just save your inheritance, Ms. Jenkins. You stopped a robbery in progress. I looked up at them, my hands trembling slightly, holding the photo of the monster sleeping in my sister's bed. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Do we arrest him now?" Agent Miller shook his head. "Not yet. If we arrest him now, he might claim he had permission and your parents might back him up because they are brainwashed. We need him to incriminate himself. We need him to try to steal the money again while we are watching. We need you to set a trap." I looked at the mugshot of Chad Evans. A cold smile spread across my face. "A trap," I repeated. "I think I know exactly how to bait him. My family wants a reunion. Let's give them a show they will never forget." The vibration of my phone against the mahogany conference table sounded loud in the quiet room, like a warning buzzer going off in a submarine. I glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Chloe. For 2 weeks, my phone had been silent. No apologies, no inquiries about where I was sleeping, just radio silence while they waited for me to come crawling back. But now suddenly my screen was lit up with a long paragraph full of crying emojis and heart symbols. I picked up the phone and read the words out loud to Agent Miller. "Jada, please come home tonight. Mom has been crying for days. We miss you so much. Tyler wants to apologize for his behavior. He is cooking a special dinner just for us. Let us be a family again. Please." I looked at Agent Miller, who was sitting across from me reviewing a stack of surveillance photos. He let out a short, dry laugh. He said, "That is classic behavior, Jada. It is called love bombing. Chad is desperate. His other investors are pulling out because of the rumors about his past. He needs a cash injection immediately. He is using your family as bait to get you into the room because he thinks he can charm you or bully you into signing that release form." I looked back at the message. A month ago, that text would have worked. A month ago, I would have rushed home desperate to fix the cracks in my family foundation. I would have believed that my mother was actually crying over me and not her declined credit card. But the Jada who would have fallen for that trap was gone. She had been washed away in the rain 2 weeks ago. I typed my reply slowly. I did not use emojis. I did not say I missed them too. I simply wrote, "I will be there at 7. I hit send and watched the delivery receipt appear instantly. They were watching their phones like hawks. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the city below. I felt a cold calm settle over me. I turned to Agent Miller. I asked him if his team was ready. I asked him if the wiretap was set up. He nodded. We will be parked in an unmarked van down the street. The moment he tries to coerce you into moving funds or admits to the fraud, we will move in. But Jada, you have to be convincing. You have to let them think they are winning. You have to let them think you are the submissive daughter one last time. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I told him not to worry. I told him that I have spent my entire life pretending that their abuse was love. I can pretend for one more dinner. I picked up my purse, which now contained a tiny high-frequency recording device sewn into the lining. They thought they were inviting a sheep back into the fold to be slaughtered. They had no idea they had just opened the door for the wolf. I was not going there to eat. I was going there to feed. The trap was set, and they had just walked right into it. I stood in the expansive walk-in closet of the presidential suite, staring at the rows of designer clothes I had purchased over the last 2 weeks. My mother always complained that I dressed like a librarian. She said my navy suits were depressing and my sensible heels were tragic. She wanted a daughter who sparkled like Chloe. Well, tonight I was going to sparkle. But not like a diamond. I was going to shine like the blade of a guillotine. I reached past the safe corporate attire and pulled out the garment bag I had been saving. I unzipped it slowly, revealing a dress that was pure architectural malice. It was a structured midi dress made of midnight black silk that hugged every curve of my body before flaring out sharply at the knees. It had a plunging asymmetrical neckline that demanded attention but offered no warmth. It was elegant, expensive, and utterly intimidating. As I stepped into it and pulled the zipper up my spine, I felt a physical transformation. The soft Jada who cried in her car was gone. The Jada who apologized for taking up space was gone. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The fabric felt like armor against my skin. I applied a layer of deep crimson lipstick. It was not a color for smiling. It was a color for war. I swept my hair back into a severe high bun, exposing the sharp line of my jaw. I looked like a woman who owned the bank, not the woman who worked in it. A firm knock at the door broke my concentration. I walked over and opened it to reveal Agent Miller. He had traded his gray government-issue suit for a bespoke charcoal tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He looked like a billionaire hedge fund manager, which was exactly the role he needed to play. He adjusted his cufflinks and nodded at me with approval. "You look terrifying," he said. "That is a compliment." I stepped aside to let him in. I handed him a pair of non-prescription glasses with thick black frames. "Put these on," I instructed. My father trusts men who look like they read the Wall Street Journal. "Tonight you are Arthur Sterling. You are a private equity investor I met at a conference in Geneva. You are silent, observant, and incredibly wealthy." Miller put on the glasses, transforming instantly from a federal agent into a financial shark. "I know the drill, Jada. I am the mark. I am the fresh meat Tyler thinks he can devour." "Exactly," I said, picking up my clutch, which concealed the high-frequency recording device. "Listen to me carefully. When we walk in there, my father is going to try to dominate the conversation with stories about his glory days. Tyler will try to dazzle you with technical jargon that makes absolutely no sense. Do not correct them. Do not interrupt them. Let them talk. Silence makes liars nervous. It makes them fill the void with more lies. The more Tyler talks, the more likely he is to slip up and admit where the money is actually going. We need him to explicitly state that the funds are for an investment. That secures the wire fraud charge." I slipped my feet into a pair of 6-inch stiletto heels with red soles. They were weapons in their own right. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the expensive perfume I had bought just for this night. It smelled of oud wood and cold cash. Tonight was going to be a funeral. I was burying my childhood. I was burying the hope that my parents would ever love me for who I am. But at least I was going to be the best-dressed person at the graveside. "Let us go," I said, opening the door to the hallway. "It is time to feed the sharks." The driveway was lined with rented luxury cars that I knew Tyler could not afford. A bright red Ferrari was parked right on the lawn, crushing the grass I used to meticulously water. It was a desperate display of wealth, meant to distract from the financial rot inside. I stepped out of the town car, my hand resting lightly on the arm of Agent Miller, who was now fully in character as Arthur Sterling. He looked every inch the billionaire investor in his charcoal tuxedo, silent and imposing. I felt a flutter of nerves in my stomach, but I crushed it down with the heel of my stiletto. I was not a daughter returning for forgiveness. I was an auditor returning for the books. We walked through the double front doors, and the smell hit me first. It was not the warm smell of home cooking I remembered from my childhood. It was the scent of cheap cologne, heavy lilies, and desperation. The foyer was draped in gold streamers that looked tacky against the classic colonial architecture. Tyler had turned my elegant sanctuary into a carnival. The room was crowded with people I vaguely recognized. There were old friends of my father, members of the church choir, and a few local business owners. They were all holding glasses of cheap champagne, looking around with hopeful, anxious eyes. They were the Marks. They were the sheep Tyler planned to shear tonight, and my parents were the sheepdogs herding them into the slaughter. I scanned the room and saw my mother Viola holding court near the staircase. She was wearing a sequined gown that was far too tight and far too young for her. She was holding a glass of wine with a manic grip, her knuckles white. When she saw me, her face transformed. She plastered on a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a mask of maternal affection that cracked at the edges. She rushed over her heels, clicking on the hardwood floor, creating a scene as she opened her arms wide. "Jada," she exclaimed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. You finally know the way home." She pulled me into a hug that felt more like a shakedown than an embrace. Her perfume was overpowering, choking me. She leaned in close and whispered in my ear, her voice dropping the sweet facade instantly. "Do not ruin this night, Jada. Tyler has big investors here. If you embarrass us, I will never forgive you. Just smile and sign the papers so we can all move on." I pulled back and looked at her. Her makeup was thick, trying to cover the deep stress lines around her mouth. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who was holding up a crumbling ceiling with her bare hands. I did not feel pity. I felt disgust. I smiled back, a razor-sharp smile that showed too many teeth. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I would not miss this for the world. I want to see exactly what Tyler has built." And I brought a guest. I introduced Agent Miller as Arthur Sterling. My mother's eyes widened when she saw his expensive suit and the heavy platinum watch on his wrist. She saw dollar signs. She grabbed his hand, shaking it eagerly, neglecting to even ask how I was doing. "Welcome, Mr. Sterling," she gushed. "You are just in time. Tyler is about to change the world." I watched her lead him away like a moth to a flame. She thought she had hooked a whale. She had no idea she had just invited the executioner into her living room. I smoothed my black dress and stepped further into the house, ready to watch it burn. My father Desmond spotted us immediately. He cut through the crowd, moving with the desperate energy of a man whose house of cards was trembling in the breeze. He was sweating slightly despite the air conditioning, and his smile was too wide, too bright, and completely hollow. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm, a grip that looked affectionate to the audience, but felt like a handcuff to me. "Everyone quiet down, please," he boomed, raising his scotch glass. "I want you all to meet someone very special. This is my eldest daughter, Jada. She is a senior executive at Sterling and Vance Private Bank. She is the financial brains behind the Jenkins operation." I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. 2 weeks ago, I was a tenant. I was a leech. I was a drug addict who needed rehab. But tonight, because he needed credibility, I was suddenly the crown jewel of the family. I was the proof that the Jenkins name meant money. He was parading me around like a prize pony, hoping my reputation would distract these people from the fact that his son-in-law was a fraud in a rented suit. The guests turned to look at me. I saw relief wash over their faces. They had been skeptical of Tyler with his buzzwords and his shifting eyes. But me standing there in a dress that cost more than their cars, with a demeanor of absolute icy control, made them feel safe. They thought if a bank executive was here, then the investment must be legitimate. I was the bait in the trap, and my father was hooking them one by one. Desmond turned his attention to Agent Miller, who was standing silently beside me, radiating power. "And who is this distinguished gentleman?" he asked, licking his lips like a hungry dog. I stepped in smooth and professional. "Father, this is Arthur Sterling. He is a private equity partner I work with in Geneva. He is looking for aggressive, high-yield opportunities in the American market." My father's eyes practically popped out of his head. He shook Miller's hand vigorously, pumping it up and down. "Mr. Sterling, it is an honor. A true honor. You have come to the right place. We are building something revolutionary here. Old money values with new money technology." Miller just nodded, adjusting his glasses. "I prefer to let the numbers do the talking, Mr. Jenkins." Desmond laughed, a nervous barking sound. "Exactly. A man after my own heart." He leaned in close to me, squeezing my arm hard enough to leave a bruise. His voice dropped to a whisper that only I could hear. The smell of scotch on his breath was overpowering. "Do not mess this up, Jada," he hissed into my ear. "Tyler needs this capital to cover the margins. If you scare this man away or say anything about the trust fund freeze, I will ruin you. I will tell everyone you are unstable. Just smile and nod." I pulled back slightly, keeping my face perfectly serene. I looked him dead in the eye. "Do not worry, Dad," I whispered back. "I am going to make sure everyone here knows exactly what this family is worth. I am going to give Tyler everything he deserves." Desmond patted my cheek, thinking he had won. He thought I was submitting. He turned back to the crowd, beaming. "Now everyone please grab a drink. My genius son-in-law Tyler has a presentation that will blow your minds." I watched him walk away, leading the lambs to the slaughter, unaware that the butcher was already in the room. Tyler walked to the center of the living room, where a portable projector screen had been set up hastily in front of the fireplace. He adjusted his silk tie and ran a hand through his hair, looking every inch the visionary genius my parents believed him to be. He tapped the microphone, and the feedback squeal made everyone wince, but he just smiled through it. He looked out at the room full of eager faces, people who had worked hard for their retirement savings, and he saw them not as human beings, but as walking wallets waiting to be emptied. He clicked a remote, and the first slide appeared. It was a chaotic mess of neon lines and graphs that went straight up to the right. In bold letters it read, "The Jenkins Protocol, Quantum AI Wealth Generation." Tyler began to speak, and it was a masterclass in manipulation. He threw around words like decentralized synergy and algorithmic predictive modeling. He claimed that his proprietary software used artificial intelligence to trade cryptocurrencies nanoseconds faster than the market. He promised returns of 300% within the first month. It was absolute gibberish. It was the kind of word salad that sounds impressive to people who do not understand technology, but to anyone with basic financial literacy, it sounded like a crime in progress. I stood near the back of the room, sipping my sparkling water. Beside me, Agent Miller leaned in slightly. His face remained impassive behind his thick glasses, but his voice was a low rumble of contempt. "That graph is mathematically impossible," he whispered. "He is not even trying to make the numbers look realistic. This is a classic Ponzi structure. He is using new buy-ins to pay off the early investors." "It is clumsy, Jada. He is desperate." I nodded slowly. I watched my father Desmond standing in the front row, nodding his head vigorously at every lie Tyler told. My father looked mesmerized. He was so desperate to be rich, so desperate to be relevant, that he was swallowing the poison without asking a single question. I saw my sister Chloe gazing at Tyler with adoration, convinced that she was marrying the next tech billionaire. It was pathetic, and it was tragic. Tyler clicked to the final slide, which simply showed a massive golden QR code and a dramatic countdown timer. "We have limited spots available for this seed round," he announced, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am opening this up to family and friends first, because I want us all to win together. The minimum buy-in tonight is $50,000. But trust me, you will make that back by next Tuesday. This is not just an investment. This is freedom. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw checkbooks being pulled out of purses. I saw hands reaching for phones to scan the code. My mother Viola looked around the room, beaming with pride as if she had given birth to Elon Musk. She caught my eye and gestured frantically for me to come closer to join the circle of winners. She had no idea that I was not there to invest. I was the demolition crew waiting for the signal to blow the building. Miller checked his watch. The trap was set. Now we just needed the confession. The applause that followed Tyler's presentation was scattered but enthusiastic. It was the sound of greedy people believing they had just found a shortcut to unlimited wealth. Tyler bowed theatrically, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He looked at my father and gave a subtle nod. The signal had been given. It was time to close the deal. My father Desmond moved first. He signaled to my mother Viola, and together they flanked me, effectively blocking my exit path. They moved with the coordination of a pair of lions isolating the weakest gazelle in the herd. But they forgot that I was not a gazelle. I was a hunter disguised in silk. Desmond placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, steering me away from Agent Miller towards a small antique side table. He opened a leather portfolio he had been clutching against his chest all evening. Inside lay a pristine document typed on thick legal bond paper. I recognized the format immediately. It was a transfer of trustee authority form. It was a document that would strip me of all power and hand the keys of the Jenkins family fortune over to a man who was currently wanted by the FBI in 3 states. "Did you see that, Jada?" my father whispered, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "That boy is a visionary. He is going to turn this family into a dynasty. But we need to move fast. The market waits for no one." He pulled a heavy gold-plated fountain pen from his pocket. It was the pen my grandfather had used to sign the original deed to this house. Seeing it in my father's sweaty hand felt like a violation. He uncapped it and held it out to me. The nib glinted under the chandelier light like a dagger. "Sign it," my father commanded. "Just sign on the dotted line, Jada. Stop being the obstacle. For once in your life, be the bridge." I looked at the paper. I looked at Tyler, who was watching us from across the room, his eyes predatory and cold. Then I looked at my mother. Viola reached out and touched my cheek. Her hand was cold. Her eyes were wet with fake tears. "Do it for your sister," my mother pleaded, her voice dropping to a manipulative whisper that was meant only for me. "Think about the baby Jada. Think about your nephew or niece. Do you want that child to grow up struggling? Do you want them to be ordinary? Tyler needs this capital to secure their future. You have your little career and your empty apartment. You are fine, but Chloe needs this. Be a good sister. Be a good daughter, just this once." The pressure in the room was suffocating. The guests were watching us, sensing the tension but mistaking it for a touching family moment. They saw a father passing the torch. I saw a desperate man trying to pawn his family's legacy to pay off his gambling debts. Desmond pressed the pen into my hand, forcing my fingers to curl around the barrel. "We are all waiting. Jada," he hissed, his smile tightening into a grimace. "Do not embarrass us. Sign it. Sign it for the future of the grandchild in Chloe's belly. Sign it, or you are dead to this family." I looked down at the paper. The ink seemed to swim before my eyes. This was the moment. This was the ultimatum. They truly believed they had won. They thought they had cornered me. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of their desperation fill my lungs. I gripped the pen tight, but I did not lower it to the paper. Instead, I raised my head and prepared to drop the match that would burn their fantasy to the ground. The heavy gold pen felt cold in my hand, like a loaded weapon. My father Desmond was practically vibrating with anticipation, his eyes darting between the tip of the pen and the signature line. My mother Viola tightened her grip on my shoulder, her fingernails digging into my skin, urging me to surrender. They wanted me to sign away my legacy. They wanted me to hand the keys of the kingdom to a wolf, because he was wearing a suit they liked. I looked down at the document. The letters seemed to blur. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of their greed and desperation. I pressed the nib of the pen hard against the thick bond paper. But I did not write Jada Jenkins. Instead, with a violent slash of my wrist, I drove the pen through the paper, tearing a jagged hole right through the center. I drew a massive, aggressive cross over the text, obliterating the legal terms. The sound of the tearing paper was shocking in the silent room, loud like a gunshot. I crumpled the ruined document into a tight ball and threw it onto the Persian rug at my father's feet. Then I dropped the expensive pen. It clattered against the hardwood floor, echoing in the stunned silence. My father looked down at the paper as if I had thrown a live grenade. My mother gasped, a strangled sound escaping her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth in horror. I turned slowly to face Tyler. He was standing by the fireplace, his smile frozen in place, but his eyes were darting around the room frantically. I raised my voice, projecting it to the back of the room, so every single guest, every potential victim could hear me clearly. I said, I will never sign that paper. I do not finance criminals. And I certainly do not launder money for a wanted con artist named Chad Evans. The name hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from Tyler's face instantly, leaving him gray and ashy. The guests started whispering. The air in the room shifted instantly from celebration to confusion. My father sputtered, his face turning a deep shade of purple. He grabbed my arm, shaking me. Jada, what are you saying? Have you lost your mind? Apologize to him right now. You are ruining everything. I ripped my arm away from him. I ignored my father completely. I kept my eyes locked on Tyler. I asked him loudly if he wanted to tell them about the active warrant for his arrest in Florida. I asked him about the $12 million he stole from the elderly couple in Texas. I asked him if the baby in my sister's belly was part of the script too. The charade was over. The game was up. That was when the predator realized he was trapped. Tyler's face contorted. The charming tech genius mask vanished, and in his place was a cornered animal. His lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing his teeth. He dropped his champagne glass, and it shattered on the floor, sending shards flying. He roared, a sound of pure primal rage. He did not care about the guests anymore. He did not care about the facade. He lunged across the room, clearing the coffee table in a single bound. His hands were curled into fists, his eyes black with violence. He was coming straight for my throat. My mother screamed a high, piercing sound that shattered the tension. My sister Chloe froze in terror. Tyler was fast and he was big. He reached out his fingers inches from my neck, ready to strangle the truth out of me. I stood my ground, not flinching, because I knew something Tyler did not. I knew the man standing next to me in the tuxedo was not an investor. And I knew that Tyler had just made the last mistake of his free life. Tyler was a blur of violence, moving faster than I expected, but he never reached me. The man I had introduced as a boring equity partner moved with a speed that defied physics. Miller stepped in front of me, his movement precise and practiced. He did not flinch. He caught Tyler's wrist in midair, just inches from my face. There was a sickening crack of bone meeting superior leverage. With a fluid motion, Miller twisted Tyler's arm behind his back and slammed him face first onto the hardwood floor. The sound of the impact shook the room. The expensive vase on the mantelpiece rattled, and a collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the air. My mother screamed again, a hand flying to her mouth. My father stood frozen, his mouth hanging open like a fish out of water, unable to process that his billionaire savior was currently eating dust. Miller pressed his knee into Tyler's back, pinning him helplessly against the floorboards. He reached inside his tuxedo jacket, but he did not pull out a checkbook or a business card. He pulled out a gold badge and a pair of steel handcuffs. Federal agent, he shouted, his voice commanding and loud, echoing off the high ceilings. Stay down. Do not move. You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The illusion of Arthur Sterling, the silent billionaire, evaporated instantly. In his place was Special Agent Miller, the hunter who had finally caught his prey. He snapped the cuffs onto Tyler's wrists, the metallic click sounding like the final gavel in a courtroom. The guests were paralyzed. The champagne glasses were forgotten. I walked over to the microphone stand that Tyler had used to spin his web of lies just moments ago. I picked it up. The feedback whine cut through the stunned silence, snapping the guests out of their trance. I looked down at the man groaning on the floor, struggling against the weight of the federal agent. Then I looked at my parents, who were staring at the handcuffs with eyes wide with horror and confusion. I addressed the room, my voice steady and amplified by the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please put your checkbooks away. The presentation is over. There is no algorithm. There is no quantum trading bot. The only thing being built in this house was a pyramid scheme designed to steal your retirement funds." My father took a step forward, his face pale. "Jada, what are you doing?" he stammered. "That is Tyler. That is family." I looked at him with cold pity. "No, Dad," I said into the microphone. "That is not Tyler. That man does not know how to code. He does not have a company." I pointed a manicured finger at the man writhing on the floor. I said, "Criminal, did you hear me clearly before you tried to choke me? When I said I do not fund criminals, I was not talking about some abstract concept. I was talking about you." I turned to my sister, who was sobbing in the corner, clutching her stomach. I spoke clearly so there would be no more secrets. "His name is Chad Evans. He is 34 years of age, and he has been stealing from families like ours for a decade." I looked back at Chad. I asked him if he wanted to explain to his investors why his fingerprints are in the FBI database under 3 different aliases. He spat at the floor, cursing me with eyes full of hate. I smiled. It was done. The mask was off, and the monster was finally leashed. The room was filled with a stunned, suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of Tyler grunting in pain as Agent Miller tightened the cuffs. The guests were frozen in place, staring at the federal agent like he was the villain. My father was still sputtering, trying to find the words to defend the man who had promised him millions. He looked at me with betrayal in his eyes, convinced that I had staged a coup out of spite. They needed proof. Words were not enough for people this deluded. They needed to see the monster with their own eyes. I walked over to the laptop that was running the presentation. It was sitting on a small table near the fireplace. Tyler had spent an hour talking about blockchain and encryption, but he had left the computer completely unlocked. It was pathetic. I tapped a few keys. I did not need to hack anything. I simply minimized his fake investment graph and opened the file Agent Miller had emailed me 10 minutes ago. I picked up the remote and pointed it at the massive screen looming over the living room. "Look closely, everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You wanted to see a portfolio. Let me show you his real track record." I pressed the button. The nonsensical charts vanished. In their place, a stark, high-contrast image filled the wall. It was an official FBI wanted poster. At the top, in bold red letters, were the words "Wanted for federal wire fraud." Underneath was a series of mugshots. There was Tyler with a beard, Tyler with blonde hair, Tyler with glasses. But the cold, dead eyes were exactly the same in every photo. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed immediately by a sharp scream from Mrs. Higgins. The text on the screen was large enough for everyone to read. Alias Chad Evans, alias Robert Thorne, alias Michael Davis. Suspect is considered armed and dangerous. Wanted for swindling over $12 million from vulnerable families in Florida, Texas, and Nevada. I clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a series of news articles. One headline read, "Conman drains grandmother's life savings." Another showed a weeping family standing in front of a foreclosed home. I looked at the crowd. "This is where your $50,000 was going," I said calmly. "It was not going into a quantum computer. It was going into a bag so he could run away in the middle of the night, leaving you with nothing but debt and shame." The reality hit the room like a bomb. The polite facade of the cocktail party shattered instantly. Chaos erupted. People who had been holding their checkbooks a moment ago were now shoving them deep into their pockets, terrified of being associated with a crime scene. A woman near the back started crying hysterically, realizing how close she had come to losing her children's college fund. Men in expensive suits started running towards the front door, pushing past each other to get away. They did not say goodbye. They did not thank the hosts. They fled like rats on a sinking ship, desperate to escape the scandal before the police vans arrived. The sound of smashing glass and frantic footsteps filled the hallway. Within seconds, the crowded room was empty, leaving behind only the debris of the party and the undeniable truth glowing on the screen. My parents stood alone in the center of the wreckage, staring up at the giant face of the man they had chosen over me. The hero was a villain, and their golden ticket was a warrant. The room was now empty of the wealthy guests who had fled the scene to save their reputations, leaving only the broken pieces of my family scattered on the floor. Agent Miller hauled Chad to his feet, dragging him towards the front door, but I was not finished. There was one more lie that needed to be surgically removed, one more tumor that was poisoning this family. I turned my gaze to my sister Chloe. She was still huddled in the corner near the velvet curtains, clutching her flat stomach with both hands weeping performative tears. She looked at our mother, hoping for protection, hoping that the pregnancy card would still shield her from the fallout. I walked back to the table and picked up a thin manila envelope. It was sealed with red tape. I held it up for my parents to see. I told them that during the federal investigation into Chad's fraud, the private detectives ran a standard background check on all known associates to trace the money flow. That included you, Chloe. I ripped the seal open. The sound was sharp and final. Inside was not a sonogram picture. It was a billing statement and a surgical record from a private cosmetic clinic in Miami, dated exactly 2 years ago. I walked closer to my mother Viola, who was standing frozen like a statue, her face gray with shock. I handed her the paper. I told her to read the highlighted section. I told her to read the medical procedure her favorite daughter had paid $5,000 for while she was supposedly on a modeling trip. Viola's hands shook so hard the paper rattled. She squinted at the text. Laparoscopic tubal ligation. She whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded coldly. For those of you who do not speak medical terminology, that means Chloe had her tubes tied. It means she voluntarily made sure she could never get pregnant. There is no baby inside her stomach, Mom. There never was. It was just a prop. It was a convenient lie to get Chad into the master suite and to get me kicked out onto the street. Chloe stopped crying instantly. The tears evaporated. She realized the game was over. She stood up, her face twisted in a mixture of guilt and defiance. She screamed at me. She said I did not want to ruin my body, Jada. I did not want stretch marks. I am an influencer. My body is my brand. I just wanted Mom and Dad to get off my back about settling down. My mother Viola looked like she had been shot in the chest. She turned her head slowly like a rusted machine to look at her golden child. The daughter she had pampered. The daughter she had kicked her hard-working child out for. She looked at Chloe's flat stomach with a look of pure horror. The nursery she had planned, the baby shower she was organizing, the legacy she thought was secure, it was all smoke. She realized in that moment that she had sacrificed her loyal daughter for a liar who cared more about her waistline than her family. Viola let out a sound I had never heard before, a low keen of absolute heartbreak. She dropped the medical record. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to the broken champagne glass. She looked at Chloe, and for the first time in her life there was no love in her eyes, only a vast, empty betrayal. The silence in the room was heavier than the storm outside. The truth had finally stripped them bare, and they were ugly underneath. The red and blue lights of the police cruiser faded into the distance, taking the man they called Tyler away to a holding cell. The front door was left wide open, letting the humid night air mix with the stale smell of the ruined party. The house was quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a funeral. My father Desmond stood in the middle of the room, staring at the empty spot where his investment graph used to be. My mother Viola was slumped on the sofa, clutching the medical record that proved her daughter was a liar. Chloe was scrolling through her phone, frantically deleting her social media posts, trying to erase the evidence of her association with a fraudster. Then suddenly the silence was broken by a sound that was synchronized and terrifying. Buzz, buzz, buzz. 3 phones vibrated at the exact same second. My father's phone in his jacket pocket, my mother's phone on the coffee table, and Chloe's phone in her hand. It was not a text message from a friend. It was a priority alert. The kind of notification that overrides silent mode. The kind of notification that signals a catastrophe. Desmond pulled his phone out with trembling fingers. The screen glowed bright white in the dim room, illuminating the sweat on his forehead. He squinted at the text, and I watched his knees buckle. He did not fall, but he swayed like a tree that had just been chopped at the base. It says, "The account is closed," he whispered, his voice barely audible. It says, "Trust revoked, permanent dissolution." Jada, what does this mean? Why does my balance say 0? Viola picked up her phone. She swiped the screen and let out a gasp. My credit limit, it is gone. It says card canceled by issuer. It says asset seizure in progress. They both looked up at me. Their eyes were wide and pleading, like children who had broken a vase and expected their mother to fix it. But I was not their mother. I was the executioner. I took a step forward, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I told them that Grandpa Theodore was a very paranoid man. I told them that when I drafted the trust agreement 5 years ago, I included a fail-safe clause called the criminal negligence stipulation. It states that if the beneficiaries knowingly or unknowingly harbor a felon or use trust funds to facilitate criminal activity, the entire trust is immediately voided. I looked at the debris of the party. I told them that by inviting a wanted fugitive into this house, and by trying to give him access to the family accounts, they had triggered that clause. The bank did not just freeze the money, Dad. They took it back. The principal has been donated to the charities listed in Grandpa's will. The trust is gone. The allowance is gone. And since this house is owned by the trust, the eviction notice should be arriving in your email inbox right about now. Desmond dropped his phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked around the room at the paintings, the furniture, the chandeliers. He realized for the first time that he did not own a single thing. He was 60 years old and he was destitute. Viola started to shake. "But where will we go?" she asked, her voice cracking. "We have no savings. We have no cash. Jada, you cannot let them take the house." I looked at them. I looked at the people who threw my clothes into the rain. I looked at the people who laughed when I was homeless 2 weeks ago. I felt a sense of absolute completion. I told them that maybe they should ask Chloe for help. I told them maybe her Instagram followers could send them some money. Then I turned around and walked towards the door, leaving them in the ruins of the empire they had destroyed themselves. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of the rain starting to fall outside again, just like it had 2 weeks ago. My father Desmond stared at his phone screen, which still displayed the notification that his life was over. He looked up at me, his eyes red and confused, searching for a loophole. He asked me how this was possible. He said that Grandpa Theodore would never leave him penniless. He said that I must have pressed the wrong button or made a mistake at the bank. I walked over to the coffee table where my briefcase was sitting. I clicked the latches open. The sound was loud and sharp, like a gunshot in the quiet room. I pulled out the original trust agreement, the one bound in blue leather, that my grandfather had signed on his deathbed. I opened it to page 42. I did not scream. I did not yell. I spoke with the calm, detached voice of a lawyer reading a verdict. I told them to listen very carefully to Clause 14b. It is called the Residency and Maintenance Stipulation. I began to read the text out loud. It states that the primary beneficiaries shall retain their right to the estate and the monthly stipend solely on the condition that the appointed trustee maintains primary residence within the main house to oversee the asset preservation. I looked up from the book. I watched the realization wash over my father's face. I told them what that meant in plain English. It meant that the money was tied to me. Not to my blood, but to my presence. Grandpa knew you were bad with money, Dad. He knew you would let this house rot if left unsupervised. So he made me the anchor. As long as I lived here, the checks cleared. As long as I slept under this roof, the lifestyle continued. I took a step closer to them. I reminded them of that night 2 weeks ago. I asked them if they remembered throwing my clothes into the mud. I asked them if they remembered telling me that I was just a tenant. I asked them if they remembered Tyler laughing as he kicked my work laptop into a puddle. When you forced me out that door, you did not just evict your daughter. You evicted your eligibility. You broke the contract. The moment my bags hit the driveway, the trust was automatically dissolved. You thought you were making space for Tyler. You thought you were clearing out the negative energy. But what you were actually doing was signing your own bankruptcy papers. My mother began to sob quietly, rocking back and forth. But we didn't know, she whispered. We didn't read the fine print. Ignorance is not a defense, I replied, cold as ice. You made a choice. You stood in this very room and you weighed your options. On one side, you had me, the daughter who paid the bills and kept the secrets. On the other side, you had Tyler, a man you met 3 months ago who promised you magic beans. You chose the magic beans. You chose the flatterer over the worker. I pointed to the door where the police had just dragged Chad Evans away. Well, you got what you wanted. You chose Tyler, and you got the full Tyler experience. You got the lies, you got the fraud, and you got the ruin. You have your favorite son-in-law now, but you do not have a cent left to your name. I closed the leather book with a heavy thud. I picked up my briefcase. I told them that the bank would be sending a team to inventory the furniture in the morning. I told them they should probably start packing. I walked to the door, and this time, I did not look back. I stepped out into the night air, which tasted sweet and clean, leaving them in the dark house they could no longer afford to keep lit. The flashing blue lights from the patrol cars outside cut through the living room window like strobe lights in a horror movie, illuminating the wreckage of the party. 2 uniformed officers marched through the open front door, their boots heavy on the floorboards that no longer belonged to my family. They took custody of the man formerly known as Tyler, relieving Agent Miller of his burden. As the officers gripped his arms, pushing him towards the exit, the facade of the Zen tech genius completely crumbled. Chad Evans did not go quietly. He did not hang his head in shame. Instead, he planted his feet, fighting against the officers with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. He twisted his body around to look at my father, Desmond, who was standing by the fireplace, looking pale and ghost-like. Chad let out a laugh that sounded like glass in a garbage disposal. He looked at my father with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are pathetic, Desmond!" he screamed, spitting the words across the room. "You stand there looking like a victim, but you are the one who opened the door. You are the one who begged me to take your money." My father stammered, his hands shaking. "He said you tricked us. You stole from us. You are a thief." Chad stopped struggling for a second, just long enough to deliver the final fatal blow. "I did not steal a dime from you, old man," he yelled, his voice echoing off the walls. "You gave it to me. Do you remember those papers you signed last week? The ones you thought were for the crypto exchange? Read the fine print, Desmond. You signed personal guarantees. You signed promissory notes using your car and your wife's jewelry as collateral for loans that I have already spent." Desmond's knees buckled. He grabbed the mantelpiece to stop himself from falling. "That is right," Chad taunted, as the police dragged him closer to the door. "I did not hack your accounts. You authorized the transfers. You were so greedy and so desperate to look like a big shot in front of your country club friends that you signed your name on every dotted line I put in front of you. You are not just broke, Desmond. You are in debt to loan sharks who do not care about your last name. I own you. Even from a jail cell, I own you." The officers finally forced him through the doorway. But Chad kept screaming into the night air, his voice carrying back into the house. You deserve this. You deserve everything that is coming to you. You sold your own daughter out for a paycheck, and you ended up with nothing. The heavy door slammed shut, but the silence that followed was worse than the screaming. My father stood there paralyzed. He realized that the handcuffs were on Chad, but the chains were on him. He had signed away his freedom with his own gold pen. He looked at his hands, the hands that had betrayed me, and realized they were the hands that had dug his own grave. The police car sirens wailed as they drove away, fading into the distance, leaving my father alone with the crushing weight of his own stupidity. My father was leaning against the mantel, gasping for air like a man who had just run a marathon. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, hoping that Chad was lying. He hoped that the man he had welcomed into his home was just shouting nonsense to hurt him before the police took him away. He wanted me to tell him that everything was going to be fine. He wanted me to fix it like I always did. I walked over to the pile of documents Chad had left on the coffee table. These were the papers my father had been signing all week, convinced he was moving money into high-yield crypto wallets. I picked up a thick stack of papers stapled together. The header did not say investment agreement. It said high-risk personal loan promissory note. I held the paper up to my father's face. I asked him if he had read the first paragraph before he signed his name. He shook his head weakly. He said Tyler told him it was just standard administrative paperwork. He said he trusted him. I laughed a dry, humorless sound. I told him that he did not sign an investment deal, Dad. You signed a co-signer agreement. Do you know what that means in legal terms? It means that you personally guaranteed every single dollar Chad borrowed from his private lenders. I flipped the page to the collateral section. I pointed to the list. It was typed in small font, but the words were clear. Collateral listed: the 1965 vintage Mustang, the emerald necklace belonging to Viola Jenkins, the golf club equity membership. I looked at him. I told him that since Chad is going to federal prison and has zero assets to seize, the creditors are coming for you. They are not going to wait for a court order. You pledged your personal property as security. That means when the loan defaults, which it will do tomorrow morning, they have the legal right to come and take your car. They can take Mom's jewelry. They can take anything that isn't nailed down. Desmond slid down the wall until he hit the floor, burying his face in his hands. But I thought we were partners, he sobbed. I thought we were making millions. You were never partners. I said, my voice hard and unforgiving. You were the mark. You were the useful idiot. Chad needed a signature with a credit history, and you gave him yours on a silver platter. You were so blinded by greed, so desperate to prove that you were a big businessman, that you did not even check what you were signing. I dropped the papers on the floor next to him. They fanned out like a deck of cards. I told him that this is the cost of your arrogance. You thought you were too smart to listen to your daughter. You thought you knew better than the woman who managed your money for a decade. Now you have a debt of $200,000 accruing interest at 20% and no way to pay it. You are not just poor, Dad, you are owned. And this time, I cannot write a check to make it go away. The bill has finally come due. My mother Viola crawled across the oriental rug, her expensive dress dragging on the floor, ruining the fabric. She grabbed the hem of my black silk gown with desperate claw-like hands. She looked up at me with mascara running down her cheeks, turning her face into a tragic mask. She begged me. She screamed that they would be homeless. She said they were too old to start over. She used every guilt trip in the book. She invoked my grandmother's name. She reminded me of the piano lessons they paid for when I was 10. She tried to cash in on a lifetime of transactional love that was now bankrupt. My father Desmond joined the chorus. He struggled to his knees, holding his chest. He pleaded with me to use my connections at the bank. He said, Jada, you are powerful. You can pull some strings. You can get the foreclosure halted. Just give us a loan, Jada. Just a small bridge loan to pay off the sharks. We will pay you back, I promise. We will be good this time. We will listen to you. I took a step back, pulling my dress from my mother's grip as if she were contagious. I looked down at them huddled together in the center of the room that was no longer theirs. I felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone, the sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard clarity of a balance sheet that had finally been balanced. I adjusted the strap of my designer bag on my shoulder. I looked at my father and shook my head slowly. I told him that he still did not understand. I am not your piggy bank, Dad. I am not your safety net. I am a senior trust officer. My job description is very specific. I identify threats to capital and I neutralize them. I walked around them, circling them like a shark circling a shipwreck. I told them that for 10 years I managed this family like a business. I covered the losses, I hid the liabilities, I subsidized the poor performance. But a good manager knows when an asset has become toxic. A good manager knows when it is time to cut the cord before the rot spreads to the rest of the portfolio. I stopped in front of the open door. The night air was cool and beckoning. I turned back to face them one last time. I told them that I had spent my whole life trying to prove I was a good investment to them. But I realized tonight that I was the only one with any value. I looked my father dead in the eye. I said, I am a risk manager, Desmond. That is what I do. And I have analyzed the data. You and Mom and Chloe are not assets. You are liabilities. You are a black hole that consumes everything and returns nothing. You are the biggest risk to my future, and tonight I have finally liquidated you. My mother wailed a sound of pure despair, but I did not flinch. I told them good luck with the creditors. I told them I hoped the sale of the furniture would cover the first month of rent in a studio apartment. Then I walked out. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the heavy front door shut behind me. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a vault closing. It was the sound of freedom. I walked to the waiting car where Agent Miller was holding the door open for me. I got in and told the driver to take me to the Four Seasons. I did not look back at the dark house. The transaction was complete. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing the noise of my mother's weeping inside the house. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. It felt physical, like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the night air. It smelled of rain and wet asphalt and ozone. It was the cleanest air I had ever tasted. It smelled like the future. Agent Miller stood beside me, his expression respectful and serious. He did not treat me like a fragile witness who needed comforting. He treated me like a partner who had just closed the deal of the century. He opened a large black umbrella not because it was raining hard, but because he was a gentleman. He held it over me, shielding me from the last few drops of the storm. We walked down the stone steps together. My heels clicked rhythmically on the wet pavement. Each step took me further away from the toxicity that had defined my life for 30 years. I could feel the house looming behind me, a massive dark silhouette against the sky. I knew that inside the lights were flickering as the reality of poverty set in. I knew my father was staring at the walls, wondering how he would pay the electric bill. I knew my sister was deleting her digital life in a panic. But I did not turn around. Not even for a second. Lot's wife looked back at the burning city and turned into a pillar of salt. I was not going to make that mistake. I was not looking at what was burning. I was looking at the road ahead. As we reached the waiting black SUV, Miller opened the rear door for me. He paused before I got in. He looked at me with a slight smile playing on his lips. "That was impressive, Ms. Jenkins," he said. "In 20 years with the Bureau, I have never seen anyone dismantle a fraud scheme with such precision. You have a talent for this." I smoothed my skirt and looked at him. "It was not talent, Agent Miller." I replied, my voice steady and calm. "It was survival. When you live in a tank full of sharks, you learn how to bite, or you get eaten. Tonight, I just decided to finally show my teeth." I slid into the leather seat of the car. It was warm and quiet inside a sanctuary of order and safety. Miller got into the front seat and nodded to the driver. The engine purred to life, a low rumble of power. As the car began to move, gliding down the long driveway past the ridiculous red Ferrari that was being hooked up to a tow truck, I felt a sense of finality. I took my phone out of my purse. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled to the entry labeled Home. I pressed delete. Then I scrolled to Dad and Mom. Delete. Delete. I put the phone away and looked out the window. The city lights were twinkling in the distance, a grid of gold and white diamonds waiting for me. I was 30 years old. I had a brilliant career. I had my dignity. And for the first time in my entire life, I had a bank account that belonged only to me. The car turned onto the main road, picking up speed. The Jenkins estate disappeared into the darkness behind us, swallowed by the night and the consequences of their own choices. I did not feel sad. I did not feel lonely. I felt light. I leaned my head back against the headrest and watched the world rush by. The storm was over. The ledger was balanced. And I was finally free. 30 days is a lifetime when you are watching an empire crumble. Exactly 1 month ago, this house was filled with champagne and false promises. Now it was filled with the heavy boots of strangers. The morning sun was bright and unforgiving, shining a spotlight on the disgrace that was unfolding on the front lawn. There were no luxury cars in the driveway today. Instead, there was a massive white box truck with the logo of a foreclosure liquidation company stenciled on the side. The grand colonial estate that my father Desmond had prized more than his own children now wore a badge of shame. A bright orange sticker was plastered across the front door. It read, "Property of the bank, no trespassing." The front door was propped open with a heavy bronze bust of my grandfather. A crew of 4 movers worked with efficient indifference. They did not care about the history of the Jenkins family. To them, this was just another job. They hauled the furniture out, piece by piece, stripping the house of its soul. The velvet sofas where my mother used to hold court were dragged across the pavement and dumped unceremoniously onto the grass. The mahogany dining table where we ate our silent dinners was stacked upside down next to a pile of garbage bags. It was a scene of perfect, terrifying symmetry. Just a few weeks ago, my parents had thrown my life onto the lawn in black plastic bags. Now the universe was returning the favor. Desmond sat on a plastic cooler near the mailbox. He was wearing the same suit he had worn at the party, but now it was wrinkled and stained. He looked 10 years older. His hair was messy, and his eyes were hollow, staring blankly at the parade of his possessions being carried away. He watched as a mover dropped a box of his expensive cigars onto the driveway. He did not even flinch. The fight had left him completely. He was a king without a castle, sitting in the ruins of his own ego. My mother, Viola, was frantic. She was running between the movers, trying to supervise them, trying to maintain some shred of authority. "Be careful with that!" she shrieked, her voice thin and hysterical. "That is a Louis XIV chair. It is worth more than your truck." The mover ignored her. He hoisted the chair onto his shoulder and tossed it onto the growing pile of debris. "Lady," he said without looking at her, "it is not your chair anymore. It belongs to the creditors. Please step back, or I will have to call the sheriff." Viola froze. The reality slapped her in the face. She was not the mistress of the house. She was a nuisance. She was a trespasser. She retreated to where Desmond was sitting and collapsed onto the grass. She looked at the mountain of stuff, her clothes, her jewelry boxes, her vanity table. It all looked so cheap sitting out there in the daylight. Without the context of the mansion, their treasures looked like junk at a yard sale. The final blow came when the bank representative walked out of the house. He was a young man with a clipboard holding a heavy ring of keys. He walked to the front door and spent a moment working on the lock. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was loud and final. Click. He turned to my parents. "The locks have been changed," he announced, checking a box on his paper. "You have 1 hour to remove your personal items from the lawn before the hauling company takes the rest to the dump." Desmond looked up. His eyes landed on the spot where my car used to be parked. He realized that when he kicked me out, he had severed the only lifeline that could have saved him from this moment. The house stood silent and empty behind him, towering over them like a tombstone. The eviction was complete. Karma had not just knocked on the door, it had moved in. The apartment complex was called The Meadows, but there was not a single blade of grass in sight. It was a brutalist block of concrete situated right next to the highway. The walls were so thin that you could hear the neighbors arguing about money, and the constant drone of traffic was a relentless reminder of where they had ended up. Inside Unit 4B, the air was stale and hot. The air conditioning unit in the window was broken, and Desmond refused to call the landlord because he was terrified of being evicted again. The living room was a cramped box that smelled of boiled cabbage and old dust. Desmond sat on a lumpy beige sofa that had come with the apartment. He was wearing his silk dressing gown from the old house, but now it was stained with coffee and frayed at the cuffs. It was a pathetic costume of a king who had lost his kingdom. He was staring at a small television set that had fuzzy reception, muttering to himself about the injustice of it all. He held a glass of tap water in his hand, swirling it as if it were an expensive scotch, pretending he was still the master of his domain. In the kitchenette, which was separated from the living room by only 3 feet of linoleum, Viola was trying to cook dinner on a stove that only had one working burner. She looked haggard. Her hair, which used to be perfectly coiffed every week, was pulled back in a messy bun. Her nails were chipped. She slammed a pot down on the counter, the noise echoing loudly in the tiny space. "I cannot live like this, Desmond," she snapped, her voice shrill and bitter. "The woman next door plays music until 3 in the morning, the water pressure is non-existent, and this stove is a fire hazard. You need to do something. You need to call Jada." Desmond did not look away from the static on the TV screen. "Do not say her name," he growled. "She is the reason we are here. She abandoned us. She is a traitor." Viola spun around, her eyes blazing with resentment. "She is not the one who signed the papers, Desmond. You are. You are the genius who mortgaged our entire lives for a crypto scam. You are the one who wanted to be a billionaire. I told you to be careful, but you just had to show off." Desmond slammed his glass down, spilling water on the cheap carpet. "Do not rewrite history, Viola. You were the one who pushed Jada out. You were the one who fawned over Tyler like he was the Messiah. Oh, Tyler is so charming. Tyler is so smart. You practically threw Chloe at him. You wanted the status just as much as I did. You wanted the private jet and the island. So do not stand there in your cheap apron and act like a victim. You drove the getaway car while I robbed the bank." Viola's face crumpled. She threw the dish towel at him. "At least I was trying to secure a future for our daughter," she screamed. "I was trying to help Chloe. What did you do? You just wanted to feed your ego. And now look at us. We are eating canned soup in a shoebox." They glared at each other across the small room. The hatred was palpable, thick and suffocating. They were trapped together in this hell of their own making. There were no more guest rooms to retreat to. There were no more galas to attend. There was just the two of them and the crushing weight of their own stupidity. They realized in that moment that they did not love each other. They had only loved the lifestyle they shared. And now that the money was gone, all that remained was the ugly truth and the sound of the highway rushing by outside, going somewhere they could never follow. The downfall of Chloe Jenkins did not happen in private. It happened in high definition on the screens of millions of strangers. The internet is a ruthless judge, and when the news broke about the fake pregnancy and the fraud, the verdict was instant and brutal. Her follower count dropped like a stone falling from a cliff. Brands that used to send her free handbags and skincare products issued public statements cutting all ties. She was not just canceled, she was radioactive. The comment sections of her old photos were no longer filled with heart emojis. They were filled with clown faces and demands for apologies that she was too ashamed to give. Now the only ring light in Chloe's life was the flickering fluorescent tube buzzing overhead in the discount supermarket where she worked. She stood behind register 4 wearing a vest made of cheap, stiff polyester that scratched her neck. It was 2 sizes too big because that was the only uniform they had left. The name tag pinned to her chest did not say Chloe. It said trainee. It was a humiliation that burned her skin every time she looked down. She wore a blue surgical mask pulled up high right under her eyes and a baseball cap pulled down low. She told the manager she was immunocompromised. The truth was, she was terrified. She was terrified that one of her former followers would walk in, recognize her eyes, and take a picture. She could see the caption now. Look at the influencer's new office. Hashtag karma. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of the scanner was the soundtrack of her new existence. She picked up a gallon of milk, her wrists aching. Her long acrylic nails were gone. She had chewed them off weeks ago out of anxiety, leaving her fingers raw and unpolished. She scanned a bag of frozen peas, a pack of diapers, a bottle of cheap wine. Her feet throbbed in the sensible black sneakers she had bought at a thrift store. She used to laugh at Jada for wearing comfortable shoes. She used to say beauty is pain. She had no idea what real pain was. Real pain was standing on a rubber mat for 8 hours a day for minimum wage while customers yelled at you because their coupon was expired. A young woman walked up to the register. She was about Chloe's age, dressed in a trendy outfit holding a new iPhone. She looked like everything Chloe used to be. The girl looked up from her phone and stared at Chloe. For a second, Chloe stopped breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped the counter, looking down, trying to make herself invisible. "You look familiar," the girl said, narrowing her eyes. "Do I know you from somewhere?" Chloe shook her head quickly, keeping her eyes on the conveyor belt. "No," she mumbled, her voice muffled by the mask. "I just have one of those faces. Do you want the receipt in the bag?" The girl shrugged and went back to scrolling on her phone. Whatever she said, popping gum. Chloe watched her walk away. A tear escaped and soaked into the mask. She thought about Jada. She thought about how she had called her sister boring and uptight. Jada had built a career on hard work and integrity. Chloe had built a castle on clouds and lies. And when the wind blew, the clouds vanished, leaving her falling to the hard concrete floor of reality. She scanned the next item. A can of dog food. This was not a nightmare. This was her life now. The influencer was dead. The cashier was clocking in. My office at Sterling and Vance was a sanctuary of glass and steel, located on the 45th floor. It was a place of absolute order where decisions were made based on logic and spreadsheets, not tears and tantrums. I was in the middle of reviewing a merger proposal when my assistant buzzed in. Her voice sounded uncomfortable. She told me there was a woman in the lobby who claimed to be my mother. She said the woman was causing a scene and refusing to leave until she saw me. I sighed and told her to let her in. I did not stand up. I remained seated behind my massive mahogany desk, using it as a shield against the chaos that was about to walk through the door. Viola Jenkins entered the room, but she was not the imperious matriarch I remembered. She looked like a ghost haunting a skyscraper. She was wearing her favorite Chanel suit, the pink one she used to wear to luncheons, but it was wrinkled and stained with what looked like coffee. Her hair was frizzy, the expensive dye job growing out to reveal gray roots. She looked small. She looked defeated. But the moment she saw me, the performance began. She rushed towards the desk, her hands outstretched like a beggar. "Jada," she sobbed, her voice cracking theatrically. "Oh, thank God. Look at you. You look so successful. My beautiful, successful girl." She tried to come around the desk to hug me, but I swiveled my chair slightly, creating a barrier. I did not smile. I did not offer her a tissue. I simply checked my watch. "You have 5 minutes, Viola," I said, my voice flat. "I have a client meeting at 2. Why are you here?" Viola froze. The rejection stung her, but she recovered quickly, pivoting to her next tactic. "The victim." She slumped into the client chair opposite me, burying her face in her hands. "How can you be so cold?" she wailed. "We are living in squalor, Jada. Your father is impossible. He yells at me all day. He blames me for everything. The apartment has cockroaches. My back hurts from the lumpy mattress. I am an old woman, Jada. I cannot survive like this. I'm afraid. She looked up at me with big watery eyes batting her eyelashes. It was the same look she used to give my father when she wanted a new diamond bracelet. But I was not my father. I just want to come home, she whispered. I know you have a nice apartment. I saw the address on your mail. Just let me stay in the guest room. I will cook for you. I will clean. I will be so quiet you won't even know I am there. I just need to get away from Desmond. He is toxic. I watched her betray her husband without a second thought. She was willing to leave him to rot in that apartment alone as long as she got to sleep on high-thread count sheets again. She was a parasite looking for a new host. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the desk. You are right, Viola, I said calmly. Desmond is toxic. But so are you. You stood by and watched him humiliate me. You chose the con man over your own daughter because you thought he would make you richer. You are not a victim here. You are an accomplice who got caught. I opened my drawer and pulled out a pamphlet I had printed out earlier, knowing this day would come. I slid it across the polished wood. It was not a check. It was a brochure for a state-funded senior living community. I cannot live with you, I said firmly. That door is closed forever. But this place accepts residents based on income. It is clean, it is safe, and it is far away from me. Viola stared at the brochure, as if it were a poisonous snake. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a flash of pure anger. You ungrateful brat, she hissed. After everything I sacrificed for you. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. You sacrificed me, Viola. Now please leave before I call security to escort you out. I pressed the button on my desk phone and watched my mother realize that her tears were a currency that had no value in this building. She stood up, snatching the brochure, and walked out the door, leaving a trail of cheap perfume and bitterness in the air. The pamphlet for the state-funded housing flapped in my mother's shaking hand, but I was not finished. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a second document. This one was not a glossy brochure. It was a single sheet of plain white paper printed with a list of addresses and phone numbers. I walked around the heavy desk and stood in front of her. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than her. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer the child seeking approval. I was the adult providing a solution. I held the paper out to her. She looked at it suspiciously, expecting it to be a legal threat or a restraining order. She snatched it from my hand and scanned the text. Her brow furrowed in confusion. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. The Community Workforce Center, the Library Computer Literacy Program. What kind of joke is this, Jada? It is not a joke, Mother, I replied, my voice steady and devoid of malice. It is a lifeline. I am not giving you money because money is what got you into this mess. You do not know the value of $1 because you have never earned one. You spent your entire life spending what other people built. I pointed to the first item on the list. That staffing agency specializes in placing seniors in entry-level positions. They have openings for greeters at department stores and receptionists at dental offices. It is minimum wage, but it is honest work. It will pay for your groceries. Viola looked at me as if I had suggested she eat out of a dumpster. Work, she gasped. I am 60 years old. I have never held a job in my life. I am a socialite, Jada. I host galas. I do not greet people at Walmart. That is exactly the problem, I said, cutting through her delusion. You defined yourself by your husband's bank account. And now that the account is empty, you think you are nothing. You need to build an identity that does not depend on a man. You need to understand what it feels like to stand on your feet for 8 hours and earn a paycheck. I pointed to the second item. And this is a free workshop at the public library. It teaches basic financial literacy. How to balance a checkbook. How to budget for rent. How to shop with coupons. You need these skills, Viola. You are going to need them to survive in the real world. She crumpled the paper in her fist. I do not want your charity classes, she hissed. I want my daughter to help me. I am helping you, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. This is the greatest gift I can give you. When you threw me out into the rain 2 weeks ago, you thought you were destroying me, but you actually saved me. You forced me to stop seeking your validation and start building my own strength. You forced me to stand on my own 2 feet, and now I am returning the favor. I am giving you the chance to finally grow up. I walked back to my chair and sat down, signaling that the conversation was over. I told her to take the paper. I told her that the workforce center opens at 8 in the morning and she should probably get there early to beat the line. Viola stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, her face red with humiliation. She looked at the crumpled paper in her hand. Then she looked at me sitting behind the desk that I had earned. She realized that her tears would not work here. She realized that the bank of Jada was closed forever. She turned around and walked out of the office, her heels clicking on the floor, but the sound was different now. It was not the confident click of a woman who owned the world. It was the desperate sound of a woman who had to go find a job. I watched her leave, and for the first time I did not feel guilty. I felt proud. I had broken the cycle. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whisper, revealing the private foyer of my new sanctuary. This was not a dusty colonial house filled with ghosts and rotting furniture. This was the penthouse suite of the Skyline Tower. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that glittered like a sea of diamonds below me. The aesthetic was minimalist and sharp. White marble floors, black leather furniture, abstract art that I had chosen myself not because it was expensive, but because I liked the way it made me feel. I kicked off my heels, leaving them where they fell. In my parents' house, leaving shoes in the hallway was a crime punishable by a lecture on etiquette. Here, it was just a sign that I was home. I walked across the living room, feeling the cool marble against my bare feet. It felt grounding. It felt real. I went to the kitchen island, which was polished obsidian. There was a bottle of vintage Cabernet breathing in a decanter. I had bought it on my way home, not for a celebration or a guest, but simply because I wanted to taste it. I poured a generous amount into a heavy crystal glass. The liquid was dark and rich, swirling like velvet. I took a sip. It tasted of blackberries and oak, and most importantly, it tasted of ownership. I paid for this wine. I paid for this glass. I paid for the view. There were no strings attached to this luxury, no trust funds, no conditions, no guilt. I walked to the edge of the window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. I looked down at the sprawling city. Somewhere down there in the maze of concrete and streetlights, my parents were probably arguing over who forgot to buy milk. Somewhere down there, Chloe was soaking her sore feet and scrolling through old photos of a life she threw away. For a moment, I felt a phantom twinge of the old obligation, the urge to go down there and fix it for them. But then I took another sip of wine, and the feeling vanished. It was replaced by a profound sense of peace. I used to think that revenge was about making them pay. I thought it was about seeing the look on Tyler's face when the handcuffs clicked, or seeing my mother's face when the credit card was declined. And yes, those moments were satisfying, but they were just the demolition. This moment right here was the reconstruction. True revenge is not about destruction. It is about indifference. It is waking up in the morning and not wondering what they are doing. It is making coffee without hearing my father's criticism. It is booking a flight to Paris without asking for permission. It is realizing that I am not a supporting character in their tragedy anymore. I am the protagonist of my own story. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The woman staring back at me was not the tired, frantic girl who tried to buy love with servitude. She was calm. She was powerful. She was whole. I raised my glass to the city lights, to the chaos I had left behind, and to the quiet future I had built with my own 2 hands. I whispered into the silence. To Jada. The city winked back at me. I turned away from the window and walked deeper into my home, ready to sleep in a bed that belonged only to me. The war was over, and for the first time in 30 years, I had finally won the peace. The most painful audit you will ever conduct is the one on your own family. Jada's journey proves that loyalty is an investment, not a charity. For years, she subsidized their disrespect with her silence, hoping for a return on investment that never came. Real power isn't just about financial success. It is about recognizing when an asset has become a liability. You cannot build a secure future while carrying dead weight. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to close the account, cut the losses, and become the sole shareholder of your own happiness. If you are ready to stop apologizing for your success and start auditing your inner circle, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs a wake-up call. Remember, you are the asset, protect your value.